I'm 28, and I've been dating my girlfriend Emma, who's 27, for almost 5 years. We met at a friend's barbecue, one of those casual Sunday afternoon things where everyone's just hanging out in someone's backyard. She showed up with one of my buddies, not as a date, just as a friend. We started talking over drinks, and it felt effortless, like we'd known each other forever. That day turned into texting. Texting turned into late-night calls, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. Emma wasn't just my girlfriend. She became my best friend. We'd binge-watch terrible reality shows, spend weekends trying new recipes, and she even joined my family's annual cabin trips. My mom adored her, my dad thought she was a good one, and my sister practically considered her a sibling. It felt like she was already part of the family, and I was part of hers. Her parents liked me, her older brother invited me to poker nights, and even her grandma remembered my birthday every year. Over the years, we'd had plenty of talks about the future, where we'd want to live, what kind of house we'd have, and yeah, even how many kids we might want someday. Emma would light up during those conversations. She'd say things like, "Our wedding's gonna be the party of the year," or she'd joke about our future kids inheriting my terrible taste in music. It felt like we were on the same page about everything. So, about 8 months ago, I started planning a proposal. I'd been saving for a ring for over a year, stashing away every extra dollar I could. I watched way too many proposal videos online, trying to figure out what style Emma might like. Flash mob in public? Too much. Quiet sunset dinner? Probably better. I settled on a weekend trip to this cozy little lakeside resort about 2 hours from where we live. The plan was simple but meaningful. A romantic dinner, just the two of us, under the stars. I bought the ring. Classic, elegant, nothing too flashy because Emma always said she hated gaudy jewelry. I felt nervous every time I opened the box just to look at it, imagining her face when I finally asked. I even practiced the speech I'd say, how she was my everything, how I couldn't imagine a life without her. All the typical cheesy but true stuff. Fast forward to the big weekend. We checked into the resort, and everything felt perfect. The weather was warm, the lake looked like glass, and Emma was in a great mood. We spent the day exploring little shops nearby, eating ice cream, and laughing about stupid inside jokes we'd built over the years. That evening, I had a private dinner booked on this balcony overlooking the lake. The staff had set it up beautifully, candles, string lights, flowers, the works. Emma looked stunning in this light blue dress, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment. Dinner was perfect. We talked, we laughed, we reminisced about our first date and all the little milestones we'd hit over the years. After dessert, my heart started racing. My palms were sweaty, and I could barely focus on what Emma was saying. When the moment felt right, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the ring box, and got down on one knee. I started my speech, something about how much she meant to me, how I wanted to grow old with her, and how I couldn't wait to start the next chapter of our lives together. But instead of the excited, yes, I'd been dreaming of, Emma froze. Her smile disappeared, and her face went pale. For what felt like an eternity, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open but no words coming out. My stomach sank. Finally, she said, "Ethan, can we wait a little bit?" I must have looked like an idiot, still kneeling there, holding the ring. Wait? Wait for what? She quickly added, "I'm not saying no. I'm not ready right now. I need more time to feel sure. I love you. I do. But I just need more time." I nodded, because what else was I supposed to do? I put the ring back in my pocket, stood up, and tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal. We finished the night in this awkward haze, both of us trying to pretend everything was fine. Back in our hotel room, Emma kept apologizing. She said she wasn't rejecting me, just that she wanted everything to feel perfect. But wasn't this perfect? The whole day, the setting, the atmosphere. It was everything I could have dreamed of. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to figure out if I'd missed something. Some sign, some hint that she wasn't ready. But I couldn't come up with anything. For months, she'd seemed excited about marriage. She dropped comments about when we're married or our future house. The drive home the next morning was dead silent. Neither of us brought it up, and every time Emma tried to break the silence with small talk, it felt forced. I kept thinking about the look on her face when I proposed, like I'd asked her to do something impossible. Once we were back home, things felt off. Emma acted like everything was fine, but I could feel the distance between us. She'd smile and kiss me like nothing had happened, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. Every time she said, "I love you," it sounded hollow. I tried to give her space. Maybe she did need more time. Maybe I'd rushed things, or maybe she really wasn't in the right headspace. But deep down, something felt wrong. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that I decided to talk to my sister, Anna. She's sharp, almost too sharp sometimes. When I told her what happened, she gave me this long, knowing look. Then she said, "Ethan, I hate to say this, but are you sure she's being honest with you?" When a girl hesitates like that, especially after years together, there's usually a reason. I brushed it off at first. Emma wasn't like that. She wasn't someone who'd play games or string me along. But the seed had been planted, and it started growing. Anna told me to start paying attention. Not in a creepy, obsessive way, but just notice the little things. Was Emma more distant? Did she spend more time on her phone? Did she seem overly defensive when I asked about her day? At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Emma seemed normal. Maybe a little more distracted than usual, but nothing alarming. But then, one evening, she mentioned a coworker. "Jake's so funny," she said casually while scrolling through her phone. I remember the way she smiled when she said his name. It was subtle, but it was there. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Every time she laughed at a text or stayed out late with work friends, I felt my stomach knot up. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Anna had gotten in my head. But deep down, I knew something was off. The days after the proposal felt like walking through a fog. Emma and I went through the motions of our daily lives, but something was undeniably different. She was still sweet, still affectionate in those surface-level ways. Hugs before work, little texts during the day, but it all felt rehearsed, like she was trying too hard to act normal. And me? I was stuck in this mental loop, replaying that night over and over. Every time I looked at her, I'd see her face when I asked her to marry me. That hesitation, that frozen look, it haunted me. I kept telling myself to be patient, that maybe Emma genuinely just needed time to sort through her feelings. But how do you go from talking about baby names and dream houses to needing time? It didn't make sense. One evening, about a week after we got back, Emma was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, giggling at something. I glanced over and asked, "What's so funny?" She turned the screen slightly away and said, "Oh, just a meme Jake sent me." Jake, the coworker, the name she'd mentioned so casually before. I felt my stomach tighten, but I forced a laugh. "You and Jake text a lot, huh?" Emma shrugged without looking up. "Yeah, he's just funny. Work's been so stressful lately. It's nice to have someone who lightens the mood." It felt innocent enough on the surface, but something about the way she said it, how she avoided eye contact, how she clutched her phone a little tighter, set off alarm bells in my head. That night, as Emma slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, jumping from one thought to the next. Was I being paranoid? Was I overthinking? But then my sister's voice echoed in my head. When someone starts acting different, there's usually a reason. The next day, I decided I needed to clear my head. I went for a drive after work, no destination in mind. I ended up parked in some random lot, just sitting there, thinking. That's when I realized what was really eating me alive. It wasn't just Emma's hesitation. It was the why. Why wasn't she ready? What had changed? And why did this Jake guy seem to pop up in every recent conversation? I promised myself I wouldn't jump to conclusions. People are allowed to have friends of the opposite sex. I wasn't going to be that insecure guy who freaks out over every text message, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention, not obsessively, but just observing. Emma had started spending more time at work, coming home later than usual. When I'd ask her how her day was, she'd give vague answers like, "Oh, just a lot of meetings," or "We had to stay late to finish a project." She'd smile and kiss me on the cheek, but there was a distance in her eyes. One Friday night, she told me she was going out for drinks with her coworkers. She said it so casually, like it was no big deal. "It's just me, Sarah, and a few others," she said while slipping on her shoes. I nodded, trying to play it cool. "Have fun. Text me if you need a ride." "Of course," she said with a quick kiss on my cheek. Then she was gone. An hour passed, then 2, then 3. Around midnight, I texted her, "Everything okay?" She replied almost immediately, "Yep, just one more drink, then I'll head home. Love you." When she finally walked through the door around 2 a.m., she was slightly tipsy but not drunk. She kicked off her heels, smiled at me, and said, "Hey, babe, you're still up?" "Yeah, couldn't sleep," I said, studying her face. "Did you have fun?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, it was good. Just a nice night out with everyone." "Everyone?" I asked. Her smile faltered for a split second. "Yeah, Sarah, Mike, Jake, the usual crew." There it was again. Jake. I didn't push it. I told myself I was being irrational, that I was letting suspicion eat away at me, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, Emma was extra affectionate, bringing me coffee in bed, snuggling up next to me on the couch, acting like everything was perfect. And maybe that would have been enough to calm my fears if I hadn't noticed her phone lighting up with a notification while she was in the shower. It was a message from Jake. The preview said, "Last night was," before it cut off. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stared at the phone, debating whether to unlock it or put it back down. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to cross that line. I set the phone back on the table and walked away, my head spinning. When Emma came out of the bathroom, she was humming to herself, wrapped in a towel. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong. I felt sick. Over the next few days, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Emma could feel me pulling back. I wasn't as talkative, I wasn't initiating affection as much, and my smiles felt forced. One night, as we were watching a movie, she paused it and turned to me. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked softly. I shrugged. "I'm fine." "No, you're not. You've been distant. Is something wrong?" I wanted to scream. Yes, something is wrong. But instead, I said, "I don't know, Em. Are you sure you're okay? Are you happy with us?" She looked at me like I just slapped her. "Of course I am. Why would you even ask that?" "Because something feels off. Ever since the proposal, you've been different, distant. And then there's Jake." Her face changed in an instant. Her eyes darted away, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Jake? Seriously, Ethan? He's just a friend. How many times do I have to tell you that?" Her defensiveness only made me feel worse. "Then why do I feel like I'm losing you?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just sat there, staring at her hands. "I don't know," she finally whispered. "I'm just confused." Confused. That word felt like a dagger in my chest. I nodded slowly and stood up. "I think I need some air." I grabbed my keys and left the apartment without another word. I drove around aimlessly for hours, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Was I losing her? Had I already lost her? And if I had, was there even a point in trying to fix things? When I finally came home, Emma was already asleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her peaceful face, and wondered how we'd gotten here. Just a few months ago, I'd been so sure she was the love of my life. Now, I wasn't sure of anything. The silence between Emma and me had become deafening. Conversations felt forced. Our routines felt robotic, and every little interaction was wrapped in this invisible layer of tension. I'd catch her glancing at me sometimes, like she wanted to say something, but then she'd look away and bury herself in her phone or whatever distraction she could find. And honestly, I was doing the same thing. Avoiding eye contact, giving short replies, and finding excuses to stay out later after work. One Friday evening, Emma said she had to stay late at the office to finish up a project. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but now every little thing felt like a red flag. I told her, "All right, just text me if it gets too late." She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and left, but something felt staged. A couple of hours later, I was scrolling through Instagram, trying to distract myself, when I noticed something odd. One of Emma's co-workers, Sarah, had posted a story from a rooftop bar downtown. The video panned across a group of people laughing and drinking, and right there, in the corner of the frame, was Emma. She wasn't sitting at a desk buried under paperwork. She was leaning against the railing, drink in hand, laughing at something Jake was saying. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself it was innocent. Maybe they'd finished their work and decided to grab a drink before heading home. But why hadn't she mentioned it? Why lie about working late if she was just hanging out with coworkers? I sat there, staring at the video on a loop, until the screen went dark. When Emma came home around midnight, she was all smiles. Hey, you're still up? She said, kicking off her heels. Yeah, couldn't sleep, I replied flatly. How was work? She hesitated for a split second before answering. It was fine. Long, but we got everything done. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. That's good. You grab a drink with the team after? Her face changed, just slightly, but I caught it. Yeah. Sarah and a few others wanted to grab a quick drink before heading home. Jake was there too, right? I said, watching her closely. She froze for half a second, her smile faltering, before she nodded. Yeah, he was there. Why? I shrugged, trying to keep my voice calm. Nothing. Just curious. Emma walked past me into the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water with her back turned to me. Her shoulders looked tense, and I could tell she was trying to avoid more questions. I didn't push it. Instead, I went to bed, but sleep never came. The next morning, Emma acted overly cheerful, like she was trying to make up for the night before. She made pancakes, asked if I wanted to go for a hike, and kept sneaking these nervous glances at me, probably wondering if I was still thinking about last night. And I was. That afternoon, while Emma was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I shouldn't have looked, I know that, but my hand moved before I could stop myself. It was a notification from Jake. Just a preview. Had such a good time last night. Can't wait to see. The rest was cut off, but it was enough. I felt sick. I set her phone back down and walked out of the bedroom. When Emma came out of the shower, she wrapped herself in a towel and smiled at me. Hey, want to go grab lunch somewhere? I shook my head. I think I'll just stay in today. She paused, sensing something was off. Are you okay? Yeah, I said, avoiding her eyes. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. I felt like I was coming apart at the seams. Every time she picked up her phone, I wondered if she was texting him. Every time she said she was working late or going out with friends, I imagined her with him instead. The paranoia was eating me alive, and I hated it. That night, I finally broke. We were sitting on the couch, watching some show neither of us was paying attention to, when I blurted out, Emma, are you being honest with me about Jake? She froze mid-bite of popcorn. What do you mean? You know what I mean, I said, my voice low but steady. I saw Sarah's Instagram story. You weren't working late. You were out drinking with Jake? Emma's face went pale. Ethan, it wasn't like that. It was just drinks with coworkers. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to overthink it. Well, congratulations, because now I'm overthinking everything, I snapped. She flinched, her eyes welling up with tears. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to lie. I don't know. Things have been weird between us since the proposal, and I didn't want to make it worse. That's not an excuse, Emma, I said, running a hand through my hair. Do you have feelings for him? She hesitated, for just a fraction of a second, but I saw it. And that hesitation said more than any words could. No, she said finally. He's just easy to talk to. Things have been so heavy between us lately, and I don't know how to fix it. I nodded slowly, trying to process her words. So, instead of talking to me, you talk to him? You lie to me? Do you even want to be with me anymore, Emma? She started crying then, shaking her head furiously. Of course I do. I love you, Ethan. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm just so confused. There was that word again. Confused. I didn't know what to say anymore. Part of me wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her we'd figure it out. But another part of me felt like I was staring at someone I didn't recognize. I need some space, I said finally, standing up. I'm gonna crash at my buddy Matt's for a few nights. I need time to think. Emma's face crumpled. Please, Ethan, don't go. We can talk. We can fix this. But I couldn't stay. Not when every look, every word, every moment felt tainted. I grabbed a bag, stuffed it with enough clothes for a few days, and walked out the door without looking back. At Matt's place, I barely spoke. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a beer and let me sit in silence. My phone buzzed with texts from Emma. Apologies, promises, desperate pleas for me to come home, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly lost. Everything I thought I knew about Emma, about us, felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And the worst part? I had no idea if it was even worth trying to hold on. The first night at Matt's place felt surreal. His couch was lumpy, the blanket smelled faintly like his dog, and the whole apartment buzzed with the hum of his ancient refrigerator. But none of that mattered. I just sat there in the dark, staring at my phone as Emma's texts kept rolling in. Ethan, please, just come home. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please, talk to me. I can't sleep knowing you're out there, angry and hurt. I read each one, but my thumbs refused to type a response. Every time I tried, my mind went back to her hesitation when I asked if she had feelings for Jake. That half-second pause. It echoed in my head over and over again. Matt didn't ask many questions. He handed me another beer, plopped down in the armchair across from me, and turned on some mindless action movie. Occasionally, he'd glance over like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. And honestly, I appreciated it. The next morning, I woke up with a crick in my neck and a foggy head. Matt had already gone to work, leaving a sticky note on the kitchen counter. Take whatever you need, man. Call me if you want to talk. I sat at his little dining table, staring at my phone. Emma had sent another flood of messages overnight. Texts, missed calls, even a voice message I couldn't bring myself to listen to. Eventually, I typed out a single sentence. I need time, Emma. Please stop texting me for now. She replied almost immediately. Okay, I'll give you space. But please know I love you, Ethan. I put my phone face down on the table and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. For the next 2 days, I stayed at Matt's place, floating in some weird emotional limbo. I went through the motions, ate his leftover pizza, scrolled through social media, binged half a season of some random Netflix show, but I couldn't shake the heaviness in my chest. Every thought eventually circled back to Emma, to Jake, to that night at the resort. By the third day, I knew I couldn't keep hiding out forever. I needed answers. Avoiding Emma wasn't solving anything. It was just prolonging the inevitable. So I packed up my bag, left a quick text for Matt, and drove home. When I walked through the front door, Emma was sitting on the couch, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the TV without actually watching it. The second she saw me, she jumped up. Ethan, her voice cracked. I held up a hand. Emma, just sit down, please. She hesitated but sank back onto the couch. I sat down in the armchair across from her, leaving a space between us that felt miles wide. We need to talk. Honestly this time, I said, my voice steady but firm. She nodded, her eyes already glassy with tears. Okay. Do you have feelings for Jake? There was no hesitation this time. No, I don't. I swear to you, Ethan. I studied her face, searching for any flicker of doubt, but she held my gaze. Then why did you lie to me about that night? About staying late at work? Emma exhaled shakily and looked down at her hands. Because I knew how it would look. I knew you'd get upset, and I didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want you to think there was something going on when there wasn't. Emma, do you realize how insane that sounds? You lied to me to avoid me thinking you were lying. Do you hear how messed up that is? She flinched, but she didn't argue. Was there ever anything? Did you ever cross a line with him? Her head snapped up. No. Ethan, I promise, nothing physical ever happened. I never cheated on you. But, there it was. That awful word again. But I did lean on him. When things felt weird between us, when I was scared about the proposal, I started talking to him more. It felt easy. He didn't expect anything from me, and he made me feel lighter, I guess. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair, letting her words sink in. So, what was I then? I said bitterly. The burden? The guy who weighed you down while Jake was your little escape? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. That's not it at all. I love you, Ethan. I've always loved you. But I got scared, and I handled it in the worst possible way. I should have come to you with my fears, not him. The room went quiet. I stared at the floor, my thoughts a chaotic mess. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But trust doesn't snap back into place just because someone says sorry. After a long silence, I finally spoke. Emma, I don't know if I can do this anymore. She froze. What do you mean? I don't know if I can look at you and not think about every time you texted him instead of talking to me. Every time you laughed at his jokes instead of letting me be the one to make you smile. You say you love me, but love isn't supposed to feel like this. Emma started crying, full on, shoulders shaking sobs. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I didn't move to comfort her. I just sat there, staring at my hands. I need time, I said quietly. I need space to figure out if I can trust you again. Because right now, I can't. Emma nodded through her tears, wiping her face with the sleeves of her sweatshirt. Okay, I understand. That night, I packed a bag again. But this time, I wasn't heading to Matt's couch. I booked a cheap motel room across town and spent the next few days there, trying to clear my head. Emma and I exchanged a few texts, mostly logistical stuff about bills and groceries, but nothing deeper. Every time I picked up my phone to type out something meaningful, I froze. What was there left to say? One afternoon, while I was scrolling through my emails in the motel lobby, a message popped up from Emma. It wasn't a text, it was a long email. She poured her heart into it, apologizing again and again, explaining how scared she'd been about the proposal, about commitment, about the future. She admitted she'd handled it horribly, that she'd let her fear push her toward Jake when she should have turned to me. But the line that stuck out the most was this: if you can't forgive me, I'll understand. But please know that I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting how I handled this. I read it over and over again, but it didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made the pit in my stomach feel heavier. I closed my laptop and leaned back in the chair, staring up at the stained motel ceiling. I had everything I needed to make a decision. I just wasn't sure if I was ready to make it yet. I spent the next few days at the motel doing absolutely nothing productive. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, the carpet felt sticky under my feet, and the faint smell of bleach lingered in the air. My laptop sat open on the desk, Emma's email glowing on the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every time I tried to type out a reply, my mind would spiral. Her words kept looping in my head, especially that last line. If you can't forgive me, I'll understand. I didn't want her to understand. I wanted her to fight for me, to show me something, anything, that would make me believe she was still the same person I fell in love with. But instead, she seemed ready to accept whatever verdict I handed down, and that somehow made it feel even worse. Matt checked in on me a couple of times. He'd text stuff like, "You good, man? Need anything?" Or "Don't sit in that motel too long. It'll start to mess with your head." He wasn't wrong. After a while, the silence and isolation started to feel suffocating. One night, I caved and went to a bar nearby. It was one of those dimly lit places with sticky countertops and a jukebox in the corner playing songs no one asked for. I ordered a whiskey, then another, and then I don't know how many more. I didn't talk to anyone. I just sat there, staring into my glass, trying to drown out the noise in my head. At some point, a woman sat down next to me. She had dark hair pulled into a messy bun and a tired but kind smile. "Rough night?" she asked. I nodded, swirling the ice in my glass. "Something like that." We talked for a bit, small talk mostly. She was polite, didn't pry too much, and eventually left with a friendly pat on my arm and a soft, "Take care of yourself, okay?" I didn't even catch her name, but for a moment, talking to someone who wasn't tied to the mess of my life felt normal. When I stumbled back into my motel room later that night, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. Emma's name sat there at the top of my text threads. My thumb hovered over it, but I couldn't bring myself to type anything. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a bitter taste in my mouth. I stared at the cracked ceiling for what felt like hours before I finally made a decision. I couldn't live like this, stuck in limbo, floating between anger, sadness, and confusion. I needed closure, one way or another. So I packed my bag, checked out of the motel, and drove back home. When I walked through the door, Emma was in the kitchen, her hair tied back, wearing one of my old hoodies. She looked up and froze, her eyes wide and glassy. "You're back," she said softly. I nodded, setting my bag down by the door. "Yeah, I think we need to talk. Really talk this time." She nodded quickly and gestured to the kitchen table. We sat down across from each other, the silence between us thick and heavy. I took a deep breath. "Emma, I need you to be completely honest with me. No more half-truths, no more avoiding things. I deserve that much." She swallowed hard and nodded. "Okay. Why did you say no to my proposal?" I asked, my voice low but steady. Emma closed her eyes for a moment before speaking. "I was scared, Ethan. Not because I don't love you, because I do. But when you proposed, I realized how final everything felt. Marriage, forever. It hit me all at once, and I panicked. I started questioning if I was ready, if I was enough for you, if I was making the right choice." Her voice broke on the last word, and she looked down at her hands. I leaned back in my chair, processing her words. "And Jake? Was he part of those doubts?" She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "He was a distraction, a way to avoid thinking about all the heavy stuff. I liked the way he made me feel, light, carefree, like nothing mattered. But it was never real, Ethan. I swear to you, it was never real. Did you ever think about crossing the line with him?" I asked bluntly. "No," she said firmly, meeting my eyes. "It never got to that point. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a connection there. And I hate myself for that. I hate that I let it get that far. You deserved better than that." I felt a sharp sting in my chest. She was being honest, I could tell. But hearing her admit to having something with him, even if it wasn't physical, still felt like a punch to the gut. "So what now?" I asked after a long silence. Emma wiped at her tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I want to fix this, Ethan. I want to rebuild what we had, even if it takes years. I'll cut off all contact with Jake. I already have, actually. I'll do whatever it takes to make you trust me again." I nodded, but I didn't say anything. Trust isn't something you can snap back into place overnight. It's slow, fragile, and sometimes it's beyond repair. We sat there in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say next. Eventually, Emma broke the silence. If you can't forgive me, I'll understand. But please know I'm sorry. For everything." I stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the street below. My mind felt like it was being pulled in two directions. On one hand, I still loved her. I couldn't turn that off, no matter how hard I tried. But on the other hand, I couldn't unhear her hesitation, couldn't unsee the way she'd smiled at her phone when Jake's name popped up. Finally, I turned back to face her. "Emma, I need more time. I can't give you an answer right now, but I need you to understand that even if I decide to stay, things aren't going to go back to the way they were. At least, not for a long time." She nodded, her face crumpling as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I understand," she whispered. That night, I slept in the guest room. Emma didn't argue, didn't protest. She just quietly accepted it. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized something. No matter how this played out, we'd both already lost something we could never get back. The days after our conversation felt heavy, like every moment was suspended in uncertainty. Emma and I existed in the same space, but it didn't feel like we were together anymore. We'd pass each other in the hallway or sit across from each other at the table, but the silence said more than either of us could. She stopped trying to make small talk, and I stopped pretending everything was fine. I stayed in the guest room every night. At first, Emma would pause outside the door like she wanted to knock, but she never did. Eventually, she stopped hesitating, and the sound of her quiet footsteps retreating back to her bedroom became part of my nighttime routine. One evening, about a week later, I came home from work and found Emma sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by open photo albums. Old pictures of us were scattered around her. Our first trip together, goofy selfies on the couch, a New Year's Eve party where she was sitting on my shoulders laughing. She looked up when she noticed me, her eyes red and puffy. "I was just going through these," she said softly, her voice breaking on the last word. I wanted to sit down next to her, to tell her that we could fix this, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. "I'll give you some space," I said instead, walking past her to the kitchen. I heard her quietly pack up the albums and shuffle back to her room. That night, I lay awake in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept flicking between two versions of Emma. The one in those photos, happy and carefree, and the one now, weighed down by guilt and regret. Were we ever going to get back to that first version? Or was this just who we were now? The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Emma had made breakfast, eggs, toast, the whole deal. She'd even set the table with 2 plates. I hesitated in the doorway for a moment before sitting down across from her. She smiled weakly. I thought, maybe we could have breakfast together, like we used to. I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. We ate in silence, the clinking of forks against plates filling the room. Halfway through, Emma spoke. "Ethan, I know I've said I'm sorry 1,000 times, and I know it's not enough. But I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to show you that I still love you, that I still want this, us." I set down my fork and sighed. "Emma, I know you're sorry, and I know you mean it. But every time I look at you, all I can think about is how you turned to someone else when things got hard. How you let someone else fill the space that should have been mine." She flinched, like I'd physically hit her. "I know, and I'll hate myself for that for the rest of my life." Neither of us said anything after that. The silence swallowed the rest of the meal. That weekend, I went out for a long drive. I had no destination in mind. I just needed to get away from the suffocating weight of our apartment. I ended up at the park where Emma and I had our second date, a sprawling green space with a little pond and a walking trail. I sat on one of the benches, watching kids chase each other and couples stroll by hand in hand, and I realized something. I didn't hate Emma. I was angry, I was hurt, but I didn't hate her. In fact, I still loved her. But loving someone isn't always enough. When I got back home that evening, Emma was sitting on the couch, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the TV without really watching it. She muted the sound when she saw me walk in. "Hey," she said quietly. "Hey," I replied. I sat down across from her, rubbing my hands together as I tried to find the right words. "Emma, I've been thinking a lot. About us. About everything that's happened." She nodded, her face pale and tense. "I love you," I said, and her breath hitched. "I do. And I believe you when you say you're sorry, and I believe you when you say you want to fix this. But I don't think I can move past this. At least, not right now." Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hand as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm not saying this because I want to hurt you," I continued. "But I can't keep living in this cycle of doubt and mistrust. Every time your phone buzzes, every time you say you're staying late at work, I'll wonder. And that's not fair to either of us." Emma started shaking her head, her voice breaking as she spoke. "No, please, Ethan. Please don't do this. We can go to therapy. We can start over. We can." I reached out and gently took her hand, stopping her rambling. "Emma, I've spent weeks trying to convince myself that we could fix this, that I could just forget, but I can't. And it's not because I don't love you. It's because I do. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." She broke down then, her head dropping into her hands as sobs racked her body. I sat there, holding her hand, feeling like the worst person in the world even though I knew I was doing the right thing. After a while, Emma wiped her face and looked up at me. "So, what happens now?" "I think we need to let each other go," I said softly. "At least for now. Maybe someday, if the timing is right, if we've both healed. I don't know. But right now, we can't keep doing this to each other." She nodded slowly, her lips trembling as she tried to hold herself together. Over the next few days, Emma started packing her things. She was quiet, almost fragile, moving around the apartment like a ghost. I tried to give her space, staying out of her way as much as possible. When the day came for her to leave, She stood by the door with her bags at her feet, staring at me with red, swollen eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she said one last time. "I know," I replied. She hesitated for a moment, then walked out the door without looking back. The silence that followed was deafening. In the weeks after Emma left, I focused on rebuilding my life, reconnecting with friends, picking up old hobbies, and just learning to exist without her. Some days were harder than others. I'd hear a song we used to love or pass by a cafe we'd go to on Sundays, and the ache would come rushing back. But slowly, the weight started to lift. I don't know where Emma is now. A mutual friend mentioned she'd moved back in with her parents for a while, trying to figure things out. I hope she's okay. I hope she's healing. As for me, I'm still healing too. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe again. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough for now.